The chandeliers of the Grand Aurelio Hotel cast golden light over silk gowns and tailored tuxedos as the city's elite gathered for Don Alessandro Vitali's annual charity gala. Crystal glasses clinked, a string quartet played softly in the corner, and beneath the polished elegance lingered the quiet tension that always followed a powerful man. Vitali stood at the center of the ballroom, commanding attention without raising his voice. In his hand was an aged envelope sealed with dark red wax, its edges worn as if it had survived decades. He lifted it slightly, a faint smirk touching his lips. "I'll give you $1 million to anyone who can read this letter," he announced smoothly. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Some chuckled, others leaned closer. It was rumored the letter was written in a nearly extinct Sicilian dialect layered with coded symbols, something scholars had failed to decipher. The offer sounded less like generosity and more like humiliation. From the edge of the room, Elena Rossi stepped forward. She had been hired as a translator for foreign guests, unnoticed until now. Her simple black dress contrasted sharply with the glitter around her. Vitali's eyes flicked toward her, amused. "You?" he asked lightly. She nodded once and took the envelope from his hand. The room quieted. She broke the seal carefully and unfolded the fragile paper. Her eyes moved across the lines, steady and focused. Then she began to read, clear, fluent, unshaken. The laughter died instantly. By the second paragraph, Vitali's smile had vanished. The private lounge upstairs was dimly lit, far removed from the music and polite applause downstairs. Heavy velvet curtains muted the city lights, and the air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and aged whiskey. Don Alessandro Vitali stood by the window, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him as Elena entered. 2 guards closed the doors quietly, leaving them alone. "You said your father taught you that dialect?" Vitali said without turning around. His tone was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "That language died with the old families." Elena didn't sit. She remained standing across from him, composed. "Not all of them," she replied. "Marco Rossi believed traditions should be preserved." At the sound of the name, Vitali slowly turned. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Marco Rossi had once been his most trusted consigliere, the man who managed secrets, finances, coded messages. Officially, Marco had betrayed the family and paid the price. "You expect me to believe you're his daughter?" Vitali asked quietly. "I don't expect anything," Elena said. "I came because the letter you mocked proves he didn't betray you. He discovered someone inside your empire was feeding information to rivals. He was gathering proof." Vitali studied her face, searching for weakness. He found none. "Why tell me this?" he demanded. "Because the traitor is still close to you," Elena answered. "And if they learn I can read what my father wrote, I won't be the only target." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Vitali spoke. "If you're lying, you die." Elena held his gaze. "If I'm not, we both survive." The explosion shattered the early morning calm like a thunderclap. Elena had just stepped out of the town car when the vehicle behind her erupted into flames, heat blasting against her back and throwing her to the pavement. Glass rained down like deadly confetti. For a moment, all she could hear was a high, ringing whine in her ears and the distant screams of bystanders scattering across the street. Vitali's security teams swarmed instantly, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Smoke curled into the gray sky as sirens wailed in the distance. The bomb had been expertly placed, precise timing, maximum damage. It had been meant for Vitali. Instead, Elena had been the one closest to it. Inside the fortified estate later that day, tension crackled like exposed wire. Vitali stood at the head of the long mahogany table, fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Only a handful of men had known his schedule that morning. "Elena was not the target," one of the captains muttered. "No," Vitali replied coldly. "She was the message." Elena, pale but uninjured except for a cut along her temple, placed a folder on the table. Her hands were steady despite the bandage at her hairline. The detonation signature matches a supplier used exclusively by Carlo De Luca, she said. The room stiffened. Carlo, Vitali's right-hand man for nearly 15 years, leaned back in his chair, slow and deliberate. "You're accusing me?" he asked softly. Elena met his eyes. "I'm stating facts." Vitali's gaze shifted between them, decades of loyalty colliding with undeniable evidence. The betrayal that Marco Rossi had died trying to expose was no longer a theory. It was sitting at the table. Carlo De Luca did not run when the accusations settled over the room like smoke. He rose slowly from his chair, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit as though preparing for a business meeting rather than a reckoning. The guards shifted uneasily, awaiting a signal from Vitali, but none came. The silence was heavier than any gunshot. "You've grown paranoid, Alessandro," Carlo said calmly. "Letting a girl with a grudge rewrite history." Elena stepped closer to the table, sliding photographs and financial records across the polished wood. Offshore transfers. Shell companies. Arms shipments rerouted without authorization. "These accounts were opened 18 years ago," she said evenly. "The same year my father confronted you about missing funds." Carlo's jaw tightened, just barely. Vitali's eyes scanned the documents, each page another fracture in decades of trust. "You told me Marco was stealing from me," Vitali said quietly. Carlo's composure cracked into something colder. "He was going to dismantle everything. He wanted out. He was going to hand us to the authorities." His gaze flicked toward Elena. "For her." The admission hit the room like a second explosion. "You ordered the bomb," Vitali said, voice now stripped of warmth. Carlo gave a faint, humorless smile. "I built this empire while you hosted galas. You think you can replace me with his daughter?" Vitali didn't raise his voice when he nodded to the guards. The gunshots were swift and final, echoing against stone walls. Carlo collapsed onto the floor he once ruled beside. As silence returned, Elena didn't flinch. But in Carlo's last breath, he had whispered something that lingered heavier than his body. "You think I was the only one?" Carlo's death should have restored order, but instead it exposed how fragile that order had always been. Within days, shipments were intercepted in Eastern Europe, accounts were frozen in Switzerland, and one of Vitali's warehouses in Palermo was burned to the ground. The attacks were too coordinated to be coincidence. Carlo had not been acting alone, he had been part of something larger. Elena stood in the operations room, screens glowing with financial data and satellite feeds. "Carlo was the gatekeeper," she explained, pointing to a web of transactions projected across the wall. "He connected your network to foreign syndicates, arms brokers, cybercrime groups, private militias. When he fell, they didn't retreat. They accelerated." Vitali watched silently. For the first time, he looked like a man studying a battlefield he no longer fully understood. "They're testing you," Elena continued. "If you respond with force, it becomes a war on multiple fronts. If you hesitate, they divide what's left of your empire." One of the older captains slammed his fist on the table. "We retaliate. We send a message." "That's exactly what they want," Elena replied calmly. "They've already embedded themselves in your infrastructure. Violence will justify their takeover." She proposed something radical: restructure the empire into legitimate enterprises, art investment funds, logistics corporations, renewable energy holdings. Shift money quietly. Dissolve criminal alliances before rivals could seize them. Vitali studied her carefully. "You're asking me to erase everything I built." "I'm asking you to survive," she said. Outside, another call came in, an ally in New York withdrawing support. The war had already begun. But Elena intended to fight it with strategy, not bullets. The ballroom in New York glittered with calculated elegance, every camera angle intentional, every guest carefully selected. This was not a criminal gathering hidden in shadows, it was a public announcement. Don Alessandro Vitali stood before investors, journalists, and former rivals, declaring his official retirement from all private ventures, and unveiling his transition into international finance and infrastructure development. Applause followed, polite but skeptical. Elena stood slightly behind him, no longer an outsider but an architect of the transformation. Over the past year, she had dismantled the empire piece by piece, selling assets before they could be seized, converting illegal revenue streams into legitimate holdings, quietly leaking information that turned rival syndicates against one another. What remained was clean, legal, untouchable. But she knew tonight would not pass peacefully. She had anticipated the assassination attempt weeks ago, tracing encrypted chatter across international networks. "You arranged this," he murmured. "I prevented it," she corrected softly. In front of everyone, Vitali removed a prepared check for $1 million and handed it to her. The same challenge that began everything. Elena looked at it briefly, then tore it in half. "I never wanted your money," she said. "Only the truth." The room froze once more.